um, how important it is to really establish those relationships with your students, because we often it's often the physical abuse and any signs of abuse are going to come out often through smaller nuances. It might come out in their writing. It might come out because they're, as it shows on the slide, their behavior might have all of a sudden changed and be very different. Their clothing, because we know teenagers are going to wear, I don't know why, I do not know why, that teenagers feel the need in 100-degree weather in Texas in the humidity to wear hoodies all day, but they will wear hoodies all day. And so there's a difference between wearing a hoodie all day and a kiddo that's trying to hide it. And so there's that little bit of balance, but really knowing your kids and how the importance of that for so many reasons in education, for teachers to really establish those relationships with their kids so that they can notice when things might be different. I know Dr. Kapavik, she's also always talks about, you know, the kindergarten teachers and sometimes the little ones, you know, once a week, those Monday mornings once over checks, just, you know, really taking that time when they're coming in to give them a, you know, a hearty greeting, and really just give them a once over to just, you know, make sure there's nothing new. If they've been gone for several days, you know, that might be an indication too. So we have those conversations and little tricks of the trade that we try to share. I didn't know if you wanted to add anything, Dr. Kapavik. I know that's one thing you like to talk about.
Yes, and so in early childhood education, we teach that that folks, our teachers, greet our students at the door every Monday morning and give them the once look over, and just to make sure that they don't see something different. They don't see any injuries. And then of course we, if you see an injury, you ask the child about the injury. And if there is something that seems unreasonable as the answer, then I always tell my students that would be a red flag. If you get a changing story, that's a red flag. And our students tend to get kind of nervous about this subject because we sometimes have students in our class who they themselves have gone through CPS experiences, or they're very nervous about reporting. And so they want to make sure they get it right. And so I share with my students that it's all about the red flags, and that if you have red flags, then you have to err on the side of caution. But with our early childhood students, it's very important to be mindful of those red flags and to not just simply dismiss them, but to make a mental note of them. And I also share to write down in your lesson planner, or not lesson planner, but grade book, to make sure you make note of patterns. Because if you end up having to report, reporting the patterns would be very helpful to the investigators. And so we can't just go based on memory. If you have a red flag, to write it down next to the student's name in a secure, confidential place, such as a grade book, because as you get red flags, those will sometimes not add up to making a phone call, but if they do add up to making a phone call, we need to have it documented somewhere so that we can relay that information to the proper places.
Thank you. And hopefully today too, we'll have some time at the end, and for you guys that are in this too, could give us some things that perhaps some suggestions that you would like us, you know, to include, or we would definitely welcome that feedback as well. So again, we go over these types of things for when to suspect sexual abuse. And these are part of our job when we're talking about abuse. It's always kind of a sad, kind of depressing day for a lot of our students when we have to go over this. And again, just as Dr. Kapavik has shared, unfortunately, you know, that we do have students that sit in our seats, our teacher candidates, that have experienced these different kinds of abuse themselves. And so we also do try to preface some of this with trigger warnings to let them know that there might be some difficult conversations because it is hard. It can be really hard to talk about, but these are those critical conversations that need to happen, and they need to know, again, um, what to look for. And sometimes with, the early childhood kiddos can be, there's sometimes it's developmental as well. Sometimes the playing with themselves and different things, but again, that sometimes you have to go with those little red flags, and if they're adding up and you've had multiple conversations, or there's more behavior that comes up about additional things that are going on, or even the conversations that's on here as well, when they're really talking about sexual knowledge and relationships that goes well beyond what would be typically age appropriate, that can be a sign that something else would be going on, that something else could be going on as well. So again, emotional abuse can be these types of things that come up: over compliance, severe depression, anxiety, or aggression. These things that comes up a lot. And I will tell you that I encourage, aside from outside of what, if you're even suspecting, because as you guys all know, if you're expecting any type of abuse, you need to report it, and we'll talk about what we share with our students later. And but absolutely report it. So ahead of time, part of getting to know your students, I really encourage, if the district allows it and your administrator allows it, to go with somebody. And I encourage my teacher candidates, once they're in the classrooms, to do home visits, so that they get an understanding of really what's going on in the home, what their children and students in their seats, what they're coming to them with, what the struggles they might have, things that you can just really learn a lot about where the child's home that they're living in, their living situation. So that can give a great insight. And again, I want to just reiterate that this is not necessarily, this isn't when you suspect the abuse, but this is just kind of a general rule that I think it's important to really get to know our kids, and establishing those relationships. And, my experience has been in the EC through 5 campuses, has been the where most of the work that I have done as an educator and as a family specialist, and just really working to go on a lot of those home visits. And so I just really encourage our teachers to get to know their students and do those home visits. I will say that because I've worked in elementary, the kids, for so many reasons, really light up when they learn that their teacher, has been to their home. No matter how humble the beginnings, they're thrilled. It's their home, and they are excited to know that they're important enough that we did a home visit for whatever reason. And again, home visits can be for good, for positive things. It doesn't necessarily have to mean for something negative. But again, knowing your students really helps to make these red flags that Dr. Kapavik talked about, to maybe be seen a little bit better, because you do know, you do have a strong understanding of and relationship with your kiddo. The other thing is I've seen a lot of things go down in the the pickup and drop off line in an elementary school. So really listening to for what's cultural and what might be going beyond that could be belittling, and if it's happening over and over and over again, and how really watching that behavior with the kiddo, and how that changes over time. And again, if that moment comes over you and you suspect that you should report it, then you need to report it.
Okay, and so we stress to our pre-service teachers that they have 5 various roles. They have 5 roles when it comes to understanding, noticing, and reporting child abuse or neglect. And I want to emphasize that if a child is in a home with domestic violence, then they are victims of abuse. And so if a teacher has any red flags that come up, that they need to be a believer, an observer, a listener, a reporter, and a model. And so I kind of want to talk about each one of these individually. I'll start with the last one first. As teachers, we are on the front lines. We see these children for more waking hours a day than many spend with their own families. Right now I'm at work, I'm with my students, and my kids are at school with their teachers. And so kids spend more waking hours with their teachers than they do with their own families many times. And so because of that, we stress to our pre-service teachers that our kids need good role models, and they need folks who make them feel good about themselves. And part of school is the reading, writing, and arithmetic, but part of school is also the socio-emotional development that we provide as educators. But if our pre-service teachers ever are in a position where they have red flags, the first thing we tell them is to be a believer of the student, to listen to the student. If the student discloses information, then you need to reassure them that that disclosure is important and that it will remain confidential up until the point where you can keep it confidential, but that you must also be a reporter. You have to make a report. You have to let your student know that it would be safe to make a report, and that it is important that that report is made. We also stress to our students that they can never assume that anybody else is going to make the report. Unfortunately, when our students meet us for the very first time, one of the very first questions I ask is, if you suspect neglect or abuse, who do you tell? And unfortunately, a lot of our students think they tell the principal or they tell the counselor. And so it's sometimes news to them that's not the answer. It can be the answer. You can involve a counselor, but it is not what you're legally obligated to do and just stop there. You must also report it to the proper authorities. We also teach our students that they have to be observers. They have to notice signs of abuse or neglect. And that's through all the different behavioral changes or physical changes that Dr. Kohler mentioned earlier. And then they have to listen to what their students say. And it's not just listening to what they say, it's listening to their words that are sometimes written on paper. As a former language arts teacher, my students would turn in free writes. And I always made sure I read them. And every once in a while, students would share things in their free writes that brought red flags to me. And so we have to make sure we're aware of that and talk to the students. And when we have red flags, make the reports. But then I will also say that it's important that we stress to our students that are our pre-service teachers. I call them students. Sorry if I keep using the word student and pre-service teacher interchangeably. But we express to our pre-service teacher the importance of and I just lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry. Well, it's important that we don't react, that we hear what our students have to say, and that we seek out the proper authorities for what it is that we are suspicious of. Dr. Kohler, did you want to add something else to that?
No, I think you hit it. You hit it right on, going into, the suggestions for responding.
Okay. And then now I remembered what I was going to say. We stress to our pre-service teachers that they're not investigators, right? They are, they're educators who are on the front lines, who are the reporters of information that they are able to see taking place in their classroom, but they are not investigators. So it is important to believe students, to listen to students, find a private place to talk with students, but to make sure they use children's vocabulary. We talk about the importance of not putting words in kids' mouths, because we do not want to hinder any type of investigation that may result from our report to Child Protective Services. So it's just important that we also determine the child's immediate need for safety. I always tell my students that you have to determine, is this a CPS call or is this a 911 call? So if safety is involved that is of immediacy, then we need to figure out if we need to get police involved. And then we need to figure out who at the school also needs to be involved. Is this something we go to the counselor to assist with? Is this something we go to the principal with? But if we do go to the counselor, it doesn't stop us from being the one who has to make the initial report. If we feel like it's something we need to get police involved, well, then we will be going to the principal, because no principal wants police on their campus without knowing what's going on. But we also need to make sure that we understand that as teachers, we still have to make that report. Just because we involved other administrators on our campus, it doesn't stop us from being liable. And then most importantly, for protecting the child or the children.
So just as Dr. Kapavik has shared, really just the first professional, we really try to emphasize this, that they're the legal requirement from the person who the first outcry, the person who first suspects it, is the one who needs to be doing the report. I've learned over time that this is scary for educators. It's, their heart is broken often because it's one of their students they care deeply for. And so often, while they don't have to pull in anybody else, they certainly can go with a counselor, with an administrator, with a mentor teacher, to make the report with them. Usually I try to encourage with a counselor, because it is scary and they're emotional about it. And it feels very formal when you're doing the report, and all the information that's required. And that's okay to do, and that it's okay for them to feel some kind of way about it, because it is scary. And they do, love their children, their students, often as if they were their own. But I also talk about how we don't want them to, kind of going back to the previous slide, it is hard when that first outcry is happening and they're sharing this information and you have it in your head, like, I'm not supposed to investigate, but they can still have a conversation during that first outcry. They don't have to just be like, oh, okay, stop, hold for 2, I gotta go, run and call. They certainly don't need to do that, or obviously not say that, but that it's okay to have that authentic conversation with them and be that person, because they obviously feel quite safe when a student is having an outcry with an adult, and a teacher, and with them, that they feel safe to do that. And so to let the child say the information, it's kind of what you do right when that conversation is over, what your responsibilities are, and that's to make the report. You're legally required to do that. You're the first person. And a lot of what we have seen is we have a lot of students who are already working in daycares, working in the K-12 system. They're already interacting with students, and they sometimes will say, well, my administrator or my so-and-so says I have to tell them. And so we talk about, like, yes, that's probably something that they are recommending that you do. And we talk about the case number that they're given, and often the school, they have to report different things too, how many CPS reports were given if they have that number. But legally, when we're just talking about the legalities of it, their legal obligation is the safety of that child. And so that, as them being the first person to suspect any type of abuse or neglect, to make that call. So again, we give them the information. We talk about that it's in the Texas Family Code. We show them the code. We want them to know that this isn't just a suggestion, that this is legal and binding, and that it needs to be done within 48 hours. And some of the ramifications of what happens if you don't. I share a story about a situation where we had a kiddo at our school that had asthma, and over they were out of the medication in the nurse's office. It had severe asthma. Long story short, over time, the child did pass due to the asthma. And so when they were investigating the situation, it did come to the nurse, and it did come back to the school saying, did this come up? Was this a was this an issue? Was this a problem? Was this reported? And as horrible as it was for the nurse to be subpoenaed and all of that, all the documentation was there. Everything was there. The nurse suspected it. It was reported. It was reported multiple times. CPS had done their due diligence and were working. And unfortunately, it ended in a horrible outcome. But again, of just really trying to emphasize with our teacher candidates that why it is so important to make that, to not be the one to determine if it should be investigated. That's left to the professionals. That's left to CPS to determine. And I had a CPS worker that was so kind and said that when we were reporting, and I said, I am not sure, but I am suspecting. And they told me, this is not your job, is to report. This is exactly what you leave it up to us to determine if we're going to investigate it or not. And so I really try to relay that to my teacher candidates that, you suspect it, you report it, you let them decide, and you do it within 48 hours. And that's what the Texas Family Code is requiring that you do. So again, we talk, and I know Dr. Kapavik mentioned this earlier, but we really, there's some great resources on the Department of Family and Protective Services website, and we share that with our students as well. And we let them know that the more information that you have readily available, such as child demographics, their name, do they have siblings that are minors that live in the home, the address, the phone numbers, the child demographics, do they have medical behavior issues? Are they, any other things that can really inform the CPS of the big picture of why you're suspecting it, the child demographics that you have access to as an educator, any of that home information. Again, this, the teacher can include when they're sharing. To be specific is important. But again, if they don't have all that information, or it's okay to just report as much as they possibly can. And one of the things that we do with all of our teacher candidates is we have some scenarios that we go over. And so we talk about, when is the difference between calling the 1-800 number? When should you call that? When can you do the report online? And when should 911 be involved? And talking about how, if you are in fear, when a child comes and they're maybe afraid to go home, the school cannot legally keep the child at school. So making sure that the appropriate authorities and CPS are called in those situations if you're truly fearing for their immediate safety, because those are the entities that can ensure that and can retain the child, but that the actual school doesn't have that type of authority. And so we go over different scenarios of when to call, when you can do it online, and I can never say the word that you're going to say, the anonymity of the reporter. And I also share with students that please be assured that no matter what, that even if you do make a call, and a call or online, however you report it, that the families, or whoever you are calling on, and you're suspecting the abuse coming from whoever it might be coming from, that they are never told that you called. And sometimes families can be very persuasive, and they are just sure that it is you that have called, and they will say all kinds of things to tell you, to get you to possibly admit that maybe you have called. But to be assured that it has not been shared, that your anonymity is intact, and that is never shared, and so that they don't need to ever fear that in their decision making, or to make that report when they're suspecting it. And again, just going back to really reiterating that when in doubt, to report. So these scenarios go over these different situations of when to call 911, when they can maybe perhaps a situation that maybe they could do something online, or when they could call, but again, that the law does require us to do it within 48 hours.
And so to reiterate what Dr. Kohler said, we teach our pre-service teachers.
Sorry.
Oh, no. When in doubt, report. I'm just going to repeat what you just said. When in doubt, report. It's very, very important that they do that. And we emphasize the fact that the law states that as long as your reporting is done in good faith, without any malice, that you will be immune from civil liability, no matter if Child Protective Services determines that there is no abuse in the home. It can't come back. The reporting of it can't come back to haunt our teachers, because their reports are confidential, they're anonymous, and no matter the outcome, that anonymity will be maintained. So these are the things we share with our pre-service teachers. Sometimes this topic makes them nervous, as Dr. Kohler stated, but it's a very important one because it protects the lives of students. It makes our pre-service teachers aware that domestic violence, that abuse of multiple types, it unfortunately occurs in some homes. And so because teachers are on the front lines, because they are the ones who see kids every single day, it's important that they're aware of what to notice and what to report, and then what happens if they don't follow through on those legal and moral obligations. So do any of you have any questions? And I think you have the power to unmute yourself if you have any questions. Oh, okay, Joni, thanks. So ask if we can share some of the scenarios we go through. So
Sure.
You want me to just share them verbally, Dr. Kohler?
Sure.
Okay, so I know one of the scenarios that we share is, and so forgive me because I should have had these pulled up ready to go as part of the slides.
I'll pull them as well. I have them right here. So if you want to start talking, and then I can pull them up too.
Okay, so one of them is you have a child, a young child, who comes and visits you right after school and shares with you that they're afraid to go home. They're afraid to go home because there's an uncle at home, and they're terrified of him. And then they allude to the fact that there's some kind of abuse occurring. What do you do? And so in the scenario, it asks 3 questions. The first question is this a suspected form of abuse? And so the students immediately always say yes on this one. And then the second question is, how do you handle it? And so some students feel like you report it within 48 hours. Some students say that this is a 911 kind of situation. And so we usually talk it out, and we feel like because that student, if they get on the bus and they go home, that they could be in immediate danger. And so that's definitely a 911 call, but we talk about how do you do that? You don't just pick up the phone and call 911. I would get a principal or an administrator on campus involved, and I would usually get school district police involved, and school district police, usually the administration, would then at that time call Child Protective Services, and then they take over. And we emphasize to our pre-service teachers that that's where they take over, and they make sure that the child is in a safe place. We also talk about the importance of notifying the administrator, because the administrator then needs to notify the guardians, because Karen, I think it's scenario 2 that I was referring to. We'll go back to 1. yes, here's scenario 2 that I'm describing. But we talk about the fact that the administrator will probably contact the guardian, because the uncle may not be the guardian, right? And so you may have a parent who's expecting their child home. We don't want the parent may be in the dark about this abusive situation. So we want to make sure that the parent knows that the child is safe, the child is not lost, that the child is with the authorities, and that's where the authorities take over to make the legal determination, the investigation that will ensue after that. Go to the next slide, Karen. Yes, and so we asked,
You want to go over that one?
No. I was going over the questions. Is this abuse? Should you make a report? And which reporting method would you choose? Go to the first scenario next.
Okay.
So in the first scenario, we have a 3rd grade teacher. You're a 3rd grade teacher. Your day begins with a parent-teacher conference for one of your students about whom you're very concerned. You've tried several things to help the student improve behaviorally and academically, but the student is still struggling. As the meeting begins, you share your concerns about the child's behavior and lack of academic progress. The parent responds by saying, quote, "I hear this story every year from teachers. She's just an evil seed who will never amount to anything." Over the course of the meeting, the parent continues to make belittling remarks about the child. The parent also says that at home, she must, quote, "punish her into compliance." All of these remarks concern you. Later in the day, you privately ask the student what type of punishment she gets at home, and she tells you that her mother locks her in a dark closet. So we ask those 3 questions. Is this abuse? And usually our students overwhelmingly say yes. Should you make a report, and which reporting method should you choose? So if you want to go to the next slide, we say, yes, this is suspected emotional abuse. Yes, you should make a report. And since the student doesn't seem to be in imminent danger, we suggest that the student contact the hotline or the telephone number. And then Antonia said, very important to remind when children are at school, staff are responsible for the children's safety, but we need to do the best thing to protect them. When a report is completed, I consider the teacher's not alone or feel scared if reported. I think we are a school team. Yes, most definitely. And I will tell you, Antonia, I'm assuming you're an educator of some sort, but sometimes these things make our pre-service teachers very, very nervous. It's funny, when you ask pre-service teachers, what are you most nervous about? Usually their number 1 answer is meeting with parents, like the parent-teacher conference makes them nervous. But then the second thing that makes them nervous is having to make these phone calls. And so I think Dr. Kohler and I both stress that this is not something you do on a daily basis as a teacher, but you have to have this in your toolbox in order to protect students. And so we'll go to the 3rd scenario. This is always an interesting one. So you have a 15-year-old boy in your classroom. He's been outgoing, confident, and actively participating in class discussions up till about 2 weeks ago. Over the 2-week period, you've noticed that he's become withdrawn and irritable. Although it is May and the weather is extremely hot, he has started wearing long sleeve shirts to school again. Today, you see him roll up his sleeve and begin picking at something on his arm. As you walk by him, you see what appears to be approximately 5 circular burn marks on his forearm. At the end of the period, after the rest of the class has left, you share with him that you noticed his injuries and ask if he needs medical attention by the nurse. The student says no and that he's fine. So before you go to the next slide, Karen, I really like this scenario because we kind of analyze what the teacher does in this situation. And as a class, we love the fact that the teacher did not confront the student in the class. And the student didn't say, "Ooh, my goodness, what's wrong with your arm? Like, what's going on?" in front of other kids, because the last thing we want to do is for the kid to already shut down more than he's already shut down. And the last thing we want to do is to embarrass him in front of other kids, because if you're a teacher and you take on a teenager, you're going to lose if there's an audience. And so we love the fact that the teacher waited till the end of the class period, held the kiddo back, and then instead of being accusatory, the teacher just simply said, "Hey, do you need to see a nurse about that?" And the student said no. Now, we ask our students, what would you do in this situation? Is this abuse? And I will tell you that in my experience, about half the class thinks it's definitely abuse and half the class thinks it's not abuse. But then what do they do with that information? And so as a class, we talk about the importance of going and talking to the nurse and asking the nurse, hey, I saw these marks on, Johnny's arm, and would you please pull him and see what he tells you is wrong? And we talk about how, and so you can go to the next slide, Karen. Is this abuse? And so we leave this answer as maybe. Maybe it is. We're not sure. This is one of those red flags where we maybe need to make a mark of it in our grade book to keep track of patterns. Because if we're seeing patterns with this 15-year-old boy, then it could be. Should we make a report? And the answer is, well, yes, we should always, when in doubt, report. So we should err on the side of caution, report the facts as you observe them. But we talk about how this is why the 1-800 hotline is so helpful, because this is where we can talk it through with another adult to get their take on it. And we talk about how this 15-year-old kid marks could be because of a domestic violence situation. Those marks, I have a kid who loves working with tractors. It could be a tractor incident, I say, or it could also be self-abuse, in which case we would want to make sure that guardians are notified, because the guardians may be unaware of the self-abuse that's going on. So we should err on the side of caution, knowing that it could be any one of those three things. It could be accidental, no big deal. It could be self-abuse, and it could be abuse at the hands of someone else.
And which is why it's important too that for their students, and why we try to emphasize with our teacher candidates to know what resources are out there and who they can turn to, because often if they are suspecting some sort of abuse, probably getting the counselor involved, the school counselor involved, is a good idea. For the child's going to need some extra support for whatever it might be. Joni, I saw your comment to the self-harm, of course, what Dr. Kapavik mentioned, and then just about like the distracted behavior being misdiagnosed as maybe being on the spectrum. Yeah, I think that's a great point, that the child is mentally, emotionally, and psychologically grounded before they can be expected to learn. And we see that in so many different levels. And there's things in the general education setting that are set up for teachers to go through those processes and have progress monitoring and lots of data to make sure that appropriate recommendations are in place, as far as, in case there might be some sort of in case it could be a learning disability, it could be, a mental illness, or whatever that it might be, that it's hard. If you can see, there's so many different things that a teacher is responsible for. And so that's why we really try to provide them with the resources of, if you suspect, you call, they'll guide you in the right direction. If you think you suspect that it's a learning disability, there's a group that you go to for that, and they guide you through that process. And so it absolutely can be a lot, but teachers, I like to try to be as positive as I can. I know we're human and stuff, but we really try to empower our teachers with and equip them with the necessary tools that they need to make sure that our students are safe and appropriately diagnosed, appropriately reported, but when in doubt, to report. So those were some of the scenarios that we do go over with our students, and hopefully that was helpful. Again, we have some a little bit of time left, and if anybody has any suggestions or anything or questions, we're certainly open to that.
And even more importantly, if any of you work in this field and would like to come be a guest speaker in any of our classes to work with pre-service teachers, please reach out to us, contact us. We're happy to talk to you about that.
Yes, Joni, all of our teachers, they take classes. They have special education classes on their degree plans that they do get some, they get curriculum. Part of the curriculum includes mental mental illnesses, it includes autism, it includes ADHD, focusing, it includes, I mean, it's a lot, but it is on there for sure. And we appreciate the question.
And I really think COVID helped bring awareness of mental illness to the forefront, because I think, well, first of all, it affected students in so many various ways, but I think it brought the conversation to the forefront so that teachers are given more tools to make the recognition of mental illness, and then where to go within schools to assist students to find resources and to assist families in finding resources. There's so
Yeah.
many resources in public schools, and, and there's counselors, there's communities in schools, there's school districts employ LPCs, and it's a matter of recognizing it in the classroom so that students can get referred to the proper services.
Yes, and I know that because of COVID, to Dr. Kapavik's point, that a lot of initiatives that the K-12 system schools are including now are training for in-service teachers to receive mental illness, first responder type mental illness training. So kind of like in an emergency situation, or and just really goes over kind of first aid is what it's called. And so that they get even more training on what to look for and what to do, how to handle those situations when it comes to mental illness. And so I think a lot of things are coming to the forefront and helping. And again, if depression could be from a chemical issue, but it could also be because perhaps there's trauma, as we know that could be triggering it. And so maybe some of the abuse and stuff could also, and or neglect may come out even through an indirect way, through getting that kind of training as well.
Well, okay, so the next question, has anything changed in the curriculum in view of the numerous school shootings? Well, I don't think so. I would say the answer within the curriculum, the specific state guideline curriculum, would be no. But there's been law changes for, of course, now we have the Guardian program where some schools elect to have their school safety plan to include designated carriers of handguns. Sorry, I'm not real smart with guns, so I don't know the proper term. But anyway, a concealed carry person on each campus. And of course, school security and safety have been completely increased. I think that all K-12 schools now are required to do shooter safety training for teachers and for administrators. So the curriculum per se, no, but the laws surrounding other issues regarding school shootings, yes, we've seen a huge change in laws. Remember, several of those laws changed prior to Uvalde.
It'll be interesting to see what comes up this next legislative session.
Exactly.
What will happen according to that. But this is too where once you become a teacher, you do have an extensive, usually it's a week long prior to everybody else starting, where you receive training and you learn the district protocols, and then the campus protocols as well. And I can tell you from being on some of the K-12 campuses recently and at the beginning of the year, there was a lot of changes have been made. And if you're a parent, you may have noticed them as well. But there's a lot of things being implemented once you're once you're employed by the district.
And teachers have training on, so there's protocols for everything, bad weather, tornadoes, school shooters, lockdown, fire, gas leaks, bomb threats. There's a whole list of things, and we receive training in each one of them. I'll never forget one time I was actually observing a student teacher a few years ago at Harmony Elementary here in San Antonio. And while I was there, fire alarm went off, and I picked up my stuff and turned towards the door to walk out. And I looked behind me and all the kids were going out the window. They had these very, very tall windows that you could walk out of. And I was like, whoa, turn around, Robin, go this way. Because the kids and the teachers knew the drill. And I guess my point is that every single school has a different drill for every single emergency. And teachers receive extensive training in it. The students receive extensive training in it because the students knew exactly where to go when that fire alarm went off. I just didn't because I was a guest in the classroom.
Yeah, and Antonia brought up just about Head Start, that they receive child abuse training. You receive child abuse training, bloodborne pathogens training at the beginning of the year, you know, all kinds of training. So yeah, so it's definitely on the forefront to make sure that our students, our children are safe.
And that they don't just get it when they're in pre-service teacher education, that districts continue.
It's and it changes. They're always constantly improving the way that they do things, you know, from where they stand in the, where they, if it's a lockdown, where they might huddle, or an active shooter, where they might go. They've changed how they notify teachers, you know, of that. Some of them have these badges and they press a button and it goes out. Some of them are doing the apps now. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff that's coming down from different areas. And I think that that's great that we're changing in responses to what's happening. It's just unfortunate that what we've been witnessing as of late. I think we're about out of time. I think we just had until 5:30.
Thank you for this
So
opportunity and thank you for your questions.
yes, and absolutely. I'll put Dr. Kapavik, I'll put our information, perhaps, I'm not sure if our contact information, I don't remember seeing it in the program, but we really would love to have any of you in your different capacities that you're out here. We would love for you to come and meet with our teacher candidates and our students here firsthand. And I think they would really appreciate anyone who'd be willing to give of their time. I know we would.
I stuck my office number there. Feel free to contact me and I'll stick my email address as well.
I don't see it in there. Maybe it's going to come up in a second. Oh, you put it on our PowerPoint?
I'm putting it in the chat.
Oh, okay.
I put yours as well.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Dr. Kapavik, I think you sent it to me directly accidentally, so I am reposting it to everyone in the chat.
Sorry, Noah, since I talked to you at the very beginning, I didn't realize I was direct messaging just you.
No
Sorry
worries.
about that.
No worries at all.
Thanks, Noah. So we'll hang out till 5:30 if anybody has any other questions. And so Noah, do you need anything else from us?
Well, we do not. You all are free to go. I think we are. I think we're pretty much wrapped up here. Thank you so much for presenting. Thank you so much for your insightful input. We really appreciate it, and I know our community really appreciates it. So thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and close out the room, everybody, and we'll see you soon again.
Hey, thanks,
Thank
Noah, for your
you.
support, and Carrie. Thanks, Carrie.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye.